Why are white families so much wealthier than black families with the same income? The typical white family has a net worth of $171,000, which is 10 times that of the black family's net worth of 17,000. Now, this persistent wealth gap has African Americans stuck in a vicious cycle of economic struggle that has a devastating impact on every aspect of our lives. My guests today all agree that the black white wealth gap is real and that it's the same today as it was in the 1950s. But my guests, they disagree on the causes and solutions. Hear their takes and meet a couple whose shocking story of housing discrimination got national media attention and has folks asking, can this happen to me? All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
It's well established that African Americans have fewer assets than whites and are less likely to own their own business, have a retirement account, and to be homeowners, which is critical to the accumulation of wealth and a factor in the stark differences between the net worth of black and white families. As we all know, a house can be an inheritance passed on to the next generation. A family can tap a property's equity for college tuition, start a business, or make a down payment for a home for a child or a grandchild. But black borrowers are less likely to receive down payment assistance. They have loans with higher interest rates, and in the case of our next guest, have their homes valued at less because of the color of their skin. Here for our leadoff panel are Tanisha and Paul Austin. They sunk $400,000 into renovating their home, but were stunned when they barely gained any value during the appraisal process. When they had a white woman pose as the homeowner, that all changed. Good morning, Paul and Tanisha.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Wow, we all know that home ownership is a proven pathway to building wealth in the United States. We also know that for African Americans in certain parts of the country, particularly places like San Francisco, buying a home can be pretty challenging. I saw the statistics that said in San Francisco, black families own 31% of the homes, whereas white families own 65%. So how difficult was it for you all, being a black couple, to buy a home in San Francisco where the prices are just astronomical?
Yeah, I mean, our story, is a truly blessed one because we got outbidded several times when we were looking to buy homes here in this area. We live right across the bridge in Marin, which is a very wealthy area. But we also was blessed because we had a black woman who wanted to sell her home to a black family. And she literally did that for us.
Wow. Yeah, that is a blessing. You hear that a lot, particularly in neighborhoods that are being gentrified, that some of the older black homeowners will hold out and won't sell that home until they can find a couple like yourselves. So let's talk about this renovation. At some point, you get the home, you get this blessing, and you guys decide to renovate this house. So why the renovation?
Well, because we purchased the home, and we were the second. That family had lived in the house since it was built in 1963, and so it needed updating. The wood paneling on the walls from the 70s were still there. The carpet from the 70s was still there. So we decided that we needed to upgrade it and make it more modern to fit our taste. So we pretty much gutted the house. We did both bathrooms, we did the kitchen, we did the living room, and then we added 1,000 square feet. Yeah. We live in an original pole home. Those are homes that were built in Marin City. They're literally on poles. Yeah. And so you have the capacity to build underneath your house. And so we put another floor down there, which gave us another den and also an apartment. So we put a 1-bedroom apartment underneath our house.
Wow, so this wasn't just your basic renovation. You guys really changed the character of this house. I saw some of the pictures. We have some of them. Our producer can show them. I mean, gorgeous, gorgeous renovation. Like you said, you added this deck, you added space to it. So here you have this beautifully renovated home and you decide to get an appraisal. That's where things went south. So tell us what happened with this appraisal process.
Man, absolutely. So When the appraiser showed up, it was me. I was the person at the house. Very kind, older white lady, but she was also, made a statement that she was an appraiser here in Marin County for over 40 years. So once we got the appraisal back and it was well below $1 million, we was very shocked. We was mad. We was angry. But also when we start thinking about it and
Well, let me
looking back
stop you,
at,
Paul. Let's make sure that viewers understand. So you say well below $1 million. If someone is sitting in a small town in the South, they're going, my God, $1 million. But help us understand how in Marin County, $1 million home is pretty standard.
yes, it is very much standard.
Well, it's probably like one of the homes in Marin County are like $40 million.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah,
you
let's
have,
give people a frame of reference that $1 million house in Marin County is probably one of the least expensive homes.
definitely you're at the lower end in Marin County with the $1 million.
So the appraisal comes back and it's under $1 million, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
What
After
were you guys
that,
expecting based on all of these beautiful renovations that you had done?
Well, good question, right? So we were expecting well over that, but also we knew the comps. So I've been paying attention to the other homes I've been selling in our community, but they were all houses sold by white families, and so they were going for 1.2, one SO for 1.7, and they had some renovations as well. But I was expecting to be in that price point because of the renovations that we had done to the home.
How much did you guys spend on these renovations? Like I said, they're beautiful. How much did you sink into them?
I would say about $400,000.
yeah.
Okay. So at a bare minimum, you expected the house to be valued equal the amount of what you had spent in the renovations.
Definitely.
Yes. We was expecting somewhere in the range of 1.4.
Yes.
Okay, great. So appraiser comes in, she tells you she's been doing this, an older white woman for over 40 years. Did she act surprised to see that you were the homeowner?
No, she didn't. She actually was complimenting our home very much. And so when she walked away, I felt like we had built a rapport and that, I felt it was good. I felt we had a good connection until the appraisal came back.
And what did it come back as?
It was 989,000.
Wow.
But she also used some code language in there. Like the area is a distinct area.
She said Marin City has distinct marketability, and she did an addendum to the appraisal where she pretty much described why she had compared us to Sausalito Homes, which is an adjacent town, but she had devalued our home because we were our lot wasn't, although our lot was bigger, our lot was on a hillside, and you get a hillside, that's how you get the view. So she had come up with reasons why our house was less valuable than the other homes, and then the comps that she included in the appraisal was, they were not appropriate. So when I read all of that, I was upset.
Okay, so you guys, she took something that should have been a value, like you're on a hillside, you have a view, and turned that into a negative to devalue the home. What did you do after you got this appraisal? I know you're upset, you're shocked, you're expecting this 1.4 or higher, and you get this 900,000, appraisal. What did you guys do next, Paul?
We reached out to our lender so we could fight it to make sure that, we could have an opportunity to get another appraisal out. I'm glad that we did because it doesn't always happen. And so they did. They sent out another appraisal. But then we put our heads together and we pulled in one of our white friends to make the home look like it was hers. And
I read that you didn't just ask your white friend. She brought photographs and staged photographs around the house to make it look like a white family lived in this house.
Yes, absolutely.
That's correct. So we took down all of our art. So if you look in the photos, you will see we have art that are distinctly Black art. And she brought a picture of her husband and her son, and she was sitting at the table working on a laptop with the deck, with the doors open, and she pretended like the house was hers.
Yeah.
And what happened after you guys, come up with this brilliant way to test your theory, which I assume at this point, did you guys have some inclination that the appraisal amount had come in differently because you're African American?
Yes.
Absolutely. I
Yes.
mean, based off of the rhetoric and the terms that the appraiser used in the appraisal, I was concerned. And I actually, when we reached out to our broker, I told him that I'm concerned about the language, and he said he was as well. And also, too, like Marin County has, we were number one in
Disparity.
race counts,
Yeah.
which is the data. We're the number one county in racial disparity in California, above Los Angeles County, above Orange County. So we're always worried about like how our race is impacting like our experiences, and particularly because Marin City is historically African American. It has a it has a perception in the county of Marin, and so this woman being 40 years in Marin County, I'm sure she came in with a racial bias.
Yeah.
So what happens when the white family, your neighbor who agrees to go along with you guys, brings in the picture of her husband? What's the appraisal after this new process happens?
1.5.
Wow. The
1.5.
same house,
Same
Yeah.
house.
same
500,000.
renovations,
Yes, we're talking
same
about.
lot, still on the hill, still on the pole, still in this city, Marin City, Black City, and this appraisal comes back almost $600,000 more.
Yes.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It was quite shocking, right?
But also expected,
Yeah.
right? So we knew that the house was we knew that the house was worth 1.4. So we were expecting 1.4, 1.5. And then we also knew that I knew if I would have had, if the house was owned by a white family, it would be valued higher.
And
And
what
so
do you all say? I just want to ask you, what do you say to folks who say racism doesn't play a part in, the generation of wealth or the wealth gap that we see in America between Black families and white families?
well, we know that's not true. We know that there's data. We know
Yeah.
that there's historical data and then current data that speaks to it. So we have all of the history, and then we have our own experiences. If we weren't, just think about, we were trying to refinance to get a better loan amount, a better rate, and we were not able to do that because the process took longer. So that impacts our income every month, or our ability to, our the extra money that we have is
Your
impacted.
discretionary income is being impacted. Your ability to have more discretionary income to build more wealth has been impacted by this racist policy, which is so blatant. So
Yep.
tell us, last question for you, Paul and Tanisha, what do you hope happens as a result of you guys going national? The story gets national attention as a result of telling your story.
Policy.
We appreciate like the national attention, but we wanted to move past the conversation. We really want some policy changes. I'm hoping that someone will write a bill to revamp the appraisal process, to really look at how this is continuing to impact Black families or families of color in America. So, we really want change
Yes.
past the conversation.
Yes.
I want to
100%.
bring into this conversation now two of our other guests. One is Jim Coleman. He's the owner of Coleman Crest Advisors, and he's the author of Cut the Crap, Close the Gap. And returning to the show is my good friend, Rushion McDonald. He's an entrepreneur and host of Money Making Conversations. Good morning, Jim. Good morning, Rushion.
Good morning.
First, I want to ask you, are either of you as shocked as I am by what happened to the Austin family?
It happens. And what I would say to the Austin family is don't give up. Continue to market your property. One point of knowing the appraised value is very important, especially if you're looking to borrow money and to leverage it to buy additional properties. But, I would encourage you to continue to market your property in all of the different ways, both online as well as through your networks. Because I lived in San Francisco and housing is very expensive. I lived there in 1999 and my home was about $1 million. Today it's probably worth about $5 million. So everything they're saying is right. But I would say just don't give up and continue to market your property direct.
Well, Jim, I know you had a conversation with our producer or had some communication, and you said that this Black wealth gap, the Black-white wealth gap, racism is not the only factors. What do you say to the Austins who say, clearly a white woman pretends to be the owner and they get $600,000 more in value of their home?
Well, I think racism does exist. There are all kinds of prejudices in our society, but the reasons for our wealth gap between white people and Asians are at 87,000 versus 65,000 for white people. We're at 41,000. It is not all racism. A lot of it is based on we've got to make sure that we've got the right skills. And I don't mean that everybody should get a college education. We need to make sure that more of our people have jobs in the trade, CDL licensing. I grew up on a pig farm here in Lexington, Kentucky, that my great-grandfather purchased on March 27, 1888. He couldn't read, he couldn't write. He was a former slave. He did not have President Obama, Kamala Harris. He didn't have the Black Caucus. He didn't have the SBA. And he purchased a farm that I currently own today for $1,200 because he took out a loan from the Union Benevolent Society that Booker T. Washington started. And he wasn't the only Black person doing that at the time. Black people in 1888 accrued a total of 14 million acres of farmland. Today, we own 3 million with more rights and opportunities than ever.
Hold on a second, Jim. I want to, your grandfather, great-grandfather, your ancestors, obviously very smart. Glad to hear that they made such a smart purchase. But you just said, racism isn't the only thing that, is causing or is the driver of this wealth gap. What do you say to that, Rushion? I think you're muted, Rushion.
I apologize. Everybody has an opinion, and I respect his opinion, but he forget the Jim Crow laws that came into effect that destroyed, Tulsa. These are isolated cases, and I respect what he has to say. But let's be honest. When I walk in the room, I am noted by the color of my skin, which immediately allows somebody to make a decision about me. Because I have been enslaved in this country, white people have made a decision about who I am. They've defined me as an animal. They defined me as a horse. They defined me as a work object, and it carries up to today. So when you go to the Asian community, yes, they're respected because they come over here. They're considered immigrants. We're not considered immigrants. We're considered descendants of slaves. So we're never given equal footing in this country because of racism. So when he says that, I respect what he says, but I have to acknowledge that the color of my skin does determine how people of power, which are particularly are white people, determine how they're going to treat me, pay me, and respect me.
Areva, I think our people, we're just not as hungry as our ancestors were. I think the welfare state has made us.
Wait a minute, Jim. Wait a minute. You said we're not as hungry. Wait. I got to get Paul and Tanisha into this. They look like the hungriest people on the planet. They bought a house. Wait, Jim. They bought a house in Marin County in the highest, real estate market in this country. Paul, when you hear someone say that Black folks aren't as hungry, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I don't believe that's true. We've never been given an equal footing, in this world that we live in, unfortunately. When you look at the Asians that was here, and especially like the Japanese, they was able to get funding after they got out of the camps that they were in.
Reparations. Right? Let's call it what it was, Paul. They got reparations.
Yes. And we've dealt with this. We had to deal with redlining. So we're constantly having to jump over hurdles. Like we're trying to get there and we're striving every day, but there's so many hurdles that get in the way of Black folks progressing that's traditionally has been set up by all these negative systems. So systematic racism is well and alive today, and we got to be able to knock down walls. So I don't believe that we're not as hungry, because we are. We're trying to get there.
Rushion, you work with a slew of entrepreneurs. You work with some of the biggest names in entertainment business. What do you say to Jim when he says we're not hungry?
Well, that's Jim's opinion. I keep saying that's his opinion. If we give him a microphone and it's amplified to the wrong people, like Booker T. Washington was given a microphone back in the day, and it was amplified, and white people accepted those values that Black people were not hungry and Black people should work with their hands and Black people should serve white people. That was Booker T. Washington. If people really knew the story, and that's all he's amplifying right now, that we're not hungry, because his microphone will be heard by certain people like Fox, and they will amplify that and say, that's the problem with Black people. They're on welfare. They sell crack. And that's really what we are fighting on a daily basis. And it's really disappointing. But again, that's his opinion. My opinion is that is wrong.
Areva, in 1888, 86% of children, Black people, they were born to two parents. Today, 73% of our children are born to one house earner. That is a major reason of why our median household income is at $41,000 versus white people being at 65 and Asians being at 87,000. 73% of our youth can't read and write at a math grade level to be able to get a good job. I know this because I was the head of EDC at the Economic Development Corporation in Prince George's County. County Executive Rushion Baker and I created over 40,000 jobs. And we went after this major initiative with Pepco, one of our big power companies. They wanted to hire 100 of our residents. We went through over 4,000 applicants to be able to get 30. And the biggest reason is that 70% of our residents had difficulty in the area of reading and math. We need to stop worrying about sending everybody to college and just
Jim,
everybody read.
That's the same thing that the CEO.
That's not racism.
Jim, okay, I got to correct the record. Your stats about Black fathers being absent is an absolute urban tale. It's a myth. It's a lie. Black fathers are present in the lives of Black kids. That's a old stereotype, a trope, a racist trope that has been perpetuated in this country for years. There is a new study out by the CDC that shows Black fathers, you're mixing marriage statistics with fathers being involved statistics. You're conflating the two. There's ample evidence that Black fathers are involved in the lives of kids. And as your statement about education, again, flat out misrepresentation. Black folks, you, me, everybody on this call, college educated folks, white folks that drop out of school still have higher levels of wealth in this country than Black folks who are educated. So education alone is not the driver of the Black-white wealth gap that we see in this country. Go ahead, Rushion. I know you want to jump in.
I just want to say that when I hear him talk, and again, it's a mistake to hear him talk because he's stuck in 1888, but he doesn't want to say anything about the Jim Crow laws that destroyed. If right there, America in 1810 had a decision, they can accept Black people into the culture, and they decided against it and created the Jim Crow laws. And we've been fighting those Jim Crow laws, and it showed itself January 6th at Capitol Hill. When we can still be defaced with negative terminology. Again, his beliefs are his belief, but he keeps referencing 1888. I don't know why he's referencing that.
Because they were wealthy then. They were wealthier than we are today.
What happened to Jim Crow laws, Jim? What happened to Jim Crow laws? What happened to Jim Crow laws? They were wealthier and didn't even have. My great-grandfather couldn't even read and write and was a millionaire. And he wasn't the only one. We own 15% of the farmland in 1888. Today we own 3%. And we've got more rights and more privileges than ever.
Jim, I want you to address what Rushion is talking about, what Paul is talking about. They both reference Jim Crow laws. They reference redlining and other discriminatory policies that make it more difficult for African Americans, well documented by some of the nation's leading economists, social scientists, that structural racism, because of those Jim Crow laws, because of those redlining laws, because of those racist policies, have had a detrimental impact on the wealth of African Americans. Address those specific policies.
I would say Jim Crow laws did have an impact, but the reasons why we lost the majority of our land, number one, is we did not have any succession plans in place. Our people did not have access to lawyers like I have today. I have a trust fund set up. They didn't understand of how to properly hand over property to the next generation. Many of our family members told our kids to get out of here and go north, go to Howard, go north and get a job in Boston. And they did for the right reason, but it hurt us in our wealth. It hurt us in our wealth. Excuse me, while I'm talking, I'll wait for you. But it hurt our wealth. We lost from 14 million in 1888 till today, we own 3 million. And we have lost tremendous wealth. We need to help our people. When I was in economic development, Rushion Baker and I, we focused on the trades and the skills of helping them to get a CDL license. If we could help every unemployed Black man in the United States just to get a CDL license to drive a truck, it takes 4 weeks. We would eliminate poverty in the next 24 months. We need to stop all about being so sophisticated and get to where they've got high-skilled jobs.
Jim, you've had the floor. I think that's a simpleton analysis of how we end poverty in this country is by letting Black men get a driver's license to start driving trucks. Obviously, that's a overly simplified analysis. But Paul, go ahead. You wanted to say something?
I just wanted to chime in. I'm a principal of a school, and as an educator, I think I have an opinion about the system, and it's not that our students they don't want to learn. We have to think about the pedagogy. We have to think about the curriculum. We have to think about how are we teaching students. And so now as educators, we're starting to evaluate, are we preparing students? Jim mentioned that students,
Can't read.
okay, they can't, 70% of Black kids can't read. I don't know if that statistic is true.
That's not true.
Yeah.
So don't repeat.
But if that's the case, that's a systematic failure. That's not a failure on the kids. So let's address that.
I'm helping a cool kid. His name is Emmanuel
I've got to wrap. Jim, hold on. I'm going to let you get back in,
Okay.
but I've got to wrap. Paul and Tanisha, they're at the airport. They were so gracious to allow us an opportunity to share their story. Thank you so much for bringing to light, what's happening around property and appraisals and what happened to you. Because if it happened to you, the reason I wanted you on is because I wanted folks to know if that could happen to you, it could happen to me, it could happen to anybody. And we all are in this together, and we all have an obligation to fight against this kind of systemic racism. And I am all in favor of your proposal, Tanisha, is that we look at how we do this from a legislative standpoint, but we also have to do it from an education standpoint. And that's why we're having this critical discussion. Thank you guys so much. Safe travels to where you're going. Jim and Rushion are going to stick around because I'm going to bring into this conversation now another good friend of mine. His name is Greg Doolin. He is a second generation owner of Doolin's on Crenshaw, one of the most successful Black-owned restaurants in California. Greg was recently recognized by the U.S. Chamber as one of its best small businesses. And when we talk about closing the Black-white generation gap, we've talked about housing and the importance of housing, but we've got to talk about entrepreneurship and Black businesses. Good morning, Greg. Thank you for joining.
Good morning. Good morning.
Okay, so I know you've been listening in on this conversation, and I know you got a lot to say about it, but let's talk first about your parents. Your parents owned one of the most famous restaurants in Los Angeles, Aunt Kizzy's Back Porch. If you ever watched the Arsenio Hall show, if you ever been in Los Angeles, you probably visited Aunt Kizzy's, and I know you worked there as a teenager. But did you ever think, Greg, that you would be the owner, a second-generation owner of the Doolin's restaurants?
I had no idea, and let me just say I'm honored to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. But before Aunt Kizzy's, a lot of people don't know, there was a little hamburger stand called Hamburger City, and that's where we started. We started off with a little hamburger stand, and I was required. I could use the word forced, but required sounds better, to work in the business. And my job was to roll the hamburger patties and to chop the onions. And I realized at an early age that there was no way I was going to make my living working in nobody's restaurant, because I hated chopping onions and I hated rolling hamburger patties. But, from as early as I can remember, all my dad talked about was owning a business, how you can't get rich in America by working on a job, and different things like that. And so eventually the hamburger business grew to 4 locations. And then he converted one of the hamburger businesses to Aunt Kizzy's Back Porch. And that's how we got in the soul food business. So there was a progression there. And eventually the business grew on me.
And I know you went off to Howard, you came back, you started working in the business. What are some of the challenges that Black business owners face? We hear about this, failure to being able to access capital. Not able to access business loans. And when they do, having loans that have higher interest rates. Have you, as a business owner, 5 restaurants in Los Angeles, encountered any of those problems?
So absolutely. So going back when my parents started, my dad was unable to get a loan. And so with 5 children, he decided to draw down on his pension. And that's how he opened the first restaurant. He drew down on his pension and he opened the first restaurant. And so failure was not an option. Things have gotten a little bit better in my day, and especially recently, things have gotten a lot better as a result of some of the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests and things like that, and some of there's been a shift in focus. But early on, it was tough. It was very, very tough to borrow money.
And Rushion, you work with a lot of small businesses. Is what Greg's saying, his dad having to go into his pension, not being able to get a loan, is that the typical experience of the Black entrepreneurs and Black businesses that you work with? You were muted again, Rushion.
Well, you told me to mute. I apologize. First of all, very familiar with Greg's father's restaurant, very familiar with Doolin's restaurant on Crenshaw. Ate there many times. I know about the quality of the food. But when you look at these situations with the PP loan, these are not situations where people are having false cries. If the white people complain, you know the black people are complaining even worse, because that's what's happening out there. Because of the fact that I myself, I have the top credit score, I have finding money in the bank, and I'm still questioned about the amount of paperwork I have to put down for loans. And it's ridiculous and it's not fair. So it really is a problem out there, and it is tied to where you live, how you look, and how you present yourself. And yes, education can play a role in that, but stereotypes play a major role in what Black people or people of color are able to do in this country. And that's what Jim is talking about right now, stereotypes that he's really accelerating on your show today.
Yeah. And I do want to cite some statistics that were shocking to me. 41% of businesses, Black businesses, were actually closed as a result of COVID-19. So we lost over 400,000 businesses. We had, 400,000 businesses, or about 1 million Black businesses in this country operating before COVID. 440 of those have had to close as of April of last year. Many of them will not be coming back. Greg, I know you're in this tough restaurant business. And one of the things we were talking about before the show is this a business from a generational wealth standpoint that you see being carried on by your kids or by the next generation in the Doolin family?
My kids have told me absolutely not. They have no interest. They have no interest in running the restaurant. But let me just say that a lot of the messaging that we have to give to Black business owners is that you have to put your ducks in a row. You have to have things in order. A lot of times when we go for loans, we don't have all the paperwork. We don't have all our tax returns. We don't have all our this and all our that. And I didn't plan to announce this morning, but last year in the middle of the pandemic, I just got a major loan from a bank to purchase 2 commercial properties on Crenshaw, because my restaurant is under, I'm struggling with the loss of parking due to the subway construction. And so we bought 2 buildings. We're going to tear one down. We're going to build a parking lot. And then we moved our headquarters to the other building. Now, I was only able to get that loan through the diligent efforts of a banker at City National Bank. Wow. Who fought for me tooth and nail to get this loan done. But I also had all my paperwork. I've been planning for this for years. So, and actually, I had all my tax returns, and I had this, and I had that. And so that's part of the messaging that we have to give small businesses, that, we have to make ourselves credit worthy.
Well, congratulations to you Congratulations on getting that loan, Greg, and you are amongst a small minority of minority businesses that are able to access capital that can allow you to grow and sustain your business. And that's why we're having this conversation about closing the Black wealth gap. We know home ownership is important. We know business ownership is important, but there are systemic factors that prevent Black businesses from being able to grow, expand, and to be sustained. And one of them is access to capital, as you just identified. So I'm glad to hear that you were able to access that loan. You were able to build your parking lot. You can grow your business. And you're right. Good message to small businesses. Have your stuff in order. Yeah, you go into a bank, have it in order. That's an important message. But an equally important message, what you said you think is starting to get through, hopefully, to white bankers, is that we've got to break down some of those barriers, some of those systemic barriers that have prevented Black businesses. Jim, I know you have an investment fund. You work with a lot of Black businesses.
I have.
Do you think that we're at a moment in our history in this country where some of those barriers are starting to be eviscerated?
I think they're gone. I think what Greg just mentioned is really the core of whether you're Black, white, Chinese, Black woman, white woman. If you don't have your facts together when you meet with the bank, you're not going to get the loan. I had a meeting yesterday with Tina Davis. She's the executive vice president at a small bank here in Lexington. It's called Community Trust Bank. I went in there with this thick document and I did my homework. I did exactly what Greg said. They were like, when can we get started? I even knew exactly how much interest they would receive from me taking out a loan. It was $40,000 over the next 10 years. So understanding even their needs is important. That's what we've got to spend more time on, helping our minority businesses versus getting them upset and distracted about racism. Second thing is
wait a minute,
I think we need to.
Jim. That's not what, that wasn't Greg's message. Greg never said that Black businesses are being distracted by racism. He said racism is real and that he had a champion inside of a bank that fought tooth and nail for him. And Greg,
but the most important reason why he got the loan, he said he did his homework.
Jim, got to be quiet. Greg, I didn't interpret what you said to mean that racism somehow is a distraction. But speak for yourself, Greg.
He didn't mention racism. He went in there prepared.
But Greg, I want you to address this issue that Jim has reinterpreted your words to somehow say that racism is a distraction for small businesses.
It really is. It's for most of us a distraction.
I don't approach it like that. And my dad, bless his heart, he passed away in 2018. He never talked about that. He just told us to work hard. He would get up in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. No, we would get up at 5 in the morning, go down to the produce market downtown. I hated going. I hated it. But we would go down and we'd get our produce. And guess what? I still do that today. 40 years later, I still do the same thing. Yeah. And so racism, I don't agree that it's not an issue, but I just don't dwell on it. Could we possibly be a larger company? Possibly, but it's learning the system, working hard, having a good product.
That's right.
Everybody, my customers are white, Black, I feed everybody, and I think that that's what has sustained us over the nearly 50 years that we've been in business. And I just don't dwell on the other stuff as much. Do I think about it from time to time? Of course, I'm a Black man, but I just don't. It's not how I operate.
Rushion, I'm gonna give you the last word on this. Is thinking about and being concerned about racism a distraction for Black business owners? Rushion, I'm gonna kill you. You keep muting yourself.
well, I don't want to interrupt Jim. He has all these great terminologies about race not being a distraction. I'm a Black man. And I've never let color of my skin stop me from being successful, but it does stop me. Let's be real. I walk in a room and I am recognized as a Black person, a Jewish person, an Italian person, a Polish person. You walk in the room, I don't know who that person is. And so that means that I have to understand that. And so, but does it stop me? No, it doesn't stop me. And that's all we're just saying. That's all Greg is just saying on this phone. And I hope Jim hears that. But we are saying that when you see racist situations, you see there are 2,100 Confederate statues still in this country. When you hear white supremacy organizations dominating the headlines, race is a problem and it's tied to the color of our skin. And so that's all I'm saying, Jim. Jim, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I do disagree with you when you tell us race does not exist. We're past that.
It's not our main problem. It's not our main problem.
I'm sorry. I got to leave it there. I think everybody's clear about your position, Jim. Rushion, thank you. Race is the problem. Thank you, Greg. Congratulations, Greg, on your success. Looking forward to that new construction and the expansion of Doolin's. Appreciate all of you for joining us. And it's really important conversation. Could take hours, but I think we did. I think Jim heard you, Rushion. I'm pretty certain.
I heard him. I respect him.
I think Jim is never going to say that it's a distraction again. I'm pretty certain.
And Greg, I just want to shout out to Greg.
We're all distracted.
To Greg, congratulations, man. I support your place. I support your father's place. Great food, man, on Crenshaw. Congratulations.
Fantastic. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Got to move on. My next guest has a lot to say about structural racism. In fact, he's written about it. He studied it extensively, and he teaches about it. Now joining me is Dr. Christian Weller. He is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and a professor at the Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Good morning, Dr. Weller.
Good morning, Areva. Thank you very much for having me.
I saw you smiling. I saw your head bobbing up and down as you were listening to that conversation. Now, you are someone who has written about structural racism, the wealth gap between whites and blacks. You're the academic on this panel today. Set the record straight for us.
Well, I think it's hard to explain the persistence of the racial wealth gap without structural racism and the history of racism. At this point, we saw in 2009 a slight narrowing of the wealth gap, but the median, meaning sort of exactly the middle of the wealth distribution, the white families had about 8 times the wealth of a median black family. And typically we say that the median or average white person without a high school degree has more wealth than the average or median black person with a college degree. You cannot explain those persistent differences without sort of going back into the long history of racial oppression, violent oppression, and the continued discrimination in key markets, be that mortgage markets, be that housing markets, be that business loan markets. One of the things, since we are on the topic of business ownership, what we know is that entrepreneurship is about twice as likely to happen in white communities as it is in black communities. It doesn't mean that black people aren't working as hard, don't have the same good ideas. It's just simply they don't have the finances. And often, I mean, we talked here about external financing from banking, but what we overlook is that businesses get started primarily and grow primarily by financing from their own families. This Greg story said, okay, people borrowed basically from their pensions. That's how they do it. What that means is wealth begets wealth. But if the previous generation doesn't have wealth, it cannot help the children and grandchildren to build wealth. And the latest numbers we pulled together is that if you look at the people near retirement, so the people 55, 64 years old, and you look at how much wealth they had inherited, and you compare black to white people, and you sort of say, okay, well, how much wealth have you inherited? How much do you expect to inherit? White people on average expect to inherit on average $164,000 more than black people. That's this intergenerational transfer. That's sort of the history, the legacy of structural racism. And our systems do not overcome that. In fact, our systems sort of make it harder. We still have continued discrimination in the mortgage markets. We still have housing market discrimination. We still have discrimination, as we now have seen multiple times in reports, in the healthcare markets. Less healthcare for African Americans, worse health outcomes, and so on and so forth. We have structural racism in food markets. African Americans live further away from healthy food options in grocery stores. All of that stuff feeds together into the racial wealth gap because it makes it harder for people to start businesses. It's harder for people. They have to spend more time going to the grocery store. It's harder for them to work in the same sort of careers and so on and so forth. No. Any market you look at, any segment where we see structural obstacles, they are systematic. They don't just pop up from one day to the next. Right. We can't just say like, okay, PPP is a one-off, right? These things persist over centuries, over decades. They're still here. In some cases, they've gotten better. In some cases, they just haven't gotten better. And those structures, the deck is stacked against African Americans, even though African Americans, because they don't inherit money from their parents and grandparents, actually need to save more, need to be able to build wealth faster than is the case for white people, who essentially get a leg up from previous generations.
And talking about being able to save more, one of the largest impediments we know for Black students in particular is high student loan debt. And we know that African Americans disproportionately shoulder more loan debt, student loan debt, than whites. I want to bring into the conversation now Olakimi Adeniji. I hope I got it right. She's a college graduate, and she has over $50,000 in student loan debt. And without relief from the federal government, she is going to be that person that will have less income, that can invest in a business, buy a home, and start to accumulate wealth. Good morning, Kimmy.
Good morning. You said it's sort of right. It's Olukemi Adeniji.
Adeniji. Okay. All right. Thank you for correcting me. I have one of those names too that people often butcher. But I wanted to talk to you, Kimmy. We can call you Kimmy, right?
Yes, of course.
Because you have Pretty high student loan debt. Tell us, what college did you go to and how much is your debt?
Yeah, okay. So I went to Barnard College in New York City. Very proud of my alma mater though. But yeah, I am of that statistic of Black students who have $50,000 and who are $50,000 in debt.
And how is that impacting your life, like your discretionary income, your ability to say buy a car or think about buying a home or investing in a business?
Yeah, so it definitely has me very, very, very conservative whenever I'm spending. I I don't even take vacations or like time off because I'm just, so concerned about this debt. It's really stressful. It's like thinking about like, all right, I wish I could be able to like start investing in a home, but I can't because I have all this debt. Or, I would like to get a new car, more of a reliable car, right? A safer car, but I have all this debt. So yeah, it's very strenuous.
And how common is Kimmy's story, Professor Weller?
It's very common, and what we need to remember is that African American students are more likely to end up with student loans, have larger loan balances, largely because they don't have as much financial backing from their parents, and often because of occupational steering and discrimination in labor markets, African Americans end up earning less than their white counterparts with a college degree. That's how we end up with these statistics that the typical Black family with a college degree has less wealth than the typical white family without a high school degree.
We have heard a lot of talk at the Biden administration about extinguishing some of the college debt, whether it's 10,000 or 50,000. The number hasn't really been decided on. But help us understand from an economic standpoint what wiping out debt like the 50,000 that Kimmy has and other Black students across this country, what would that do in terms of the Black-white wealth gap?
Okay, let me get this out. Eliminating the Black-white wealth gap is very hard because it's so large, because essentially white people start off with several $100,000 out of the gate that they know they're going to get from their families at some point. Wiping out student debt and providing debt-free college will have a measurable impact. It has two effects. The first one is, such as in Kimmy's situation, right? It takes away the debt and allows people to then focus on other things. It increases mobility, right? You no longer are stuck in a certain location or a job because you feel you need to pay off the debt, and that is good for your career, good for productivity. The other part is we do know from experiments, for instance, Kalamazoo and elsewhere, that by essentially giving people access to a debt-free college education, it increases attendance rates and it increases graduation rates, especially among people of color. So we're going to get more people going to college. We're going to get more people graduating from college and thereby earning more and not being settled by debt.
And I heard you say, Professor Weller, that shrinking this gap is going to be really, really difficult because white folks are starting out with almost $200,000 ahead of Black folks. But if you had to give two solutions, what would you recommend that the Biden-Harris administration do? There's been a lot of talk. Biden says, addressing systemic racism is a central part of his platform. What are the two key things you think that they can do from an economic standpoint that would shrink this gap?
Well, since we're on the topic of debt-free college, I think it's an important step. I think it goes in the right direction, but it's not the biggest step we can take. The biggest step we do know that is on the table that has legislation behind it are so-called baby bonds, whereby both Black and white kids up till age 18 would get about $1,000. It would go down depending on the family's income or wealth. That's certainly one important way. On average, it would eliminate about a quarter of the gap. At the median, it would probably eliminate the entire gap. That's an important step. The important piece here is both Black and white families would benefit from it, but the benefits, because it would be tied to family wealth, would disproportionately go to African Americans. But the rest of the wealth gap, that especially in average, that remains, eventually we have to come to grips with the fact that it requires some massive amount of cash transfers to African Americans, just to African Americans. I'm usually don't like to use the term reparations for that, because reparations is something different. Reparations goes beyond that. It has to acknowledge the historical wrong of slavery, Jim Crow, and discrimination. But some form of massive, large transfers of wealth will have to take place in order to shrink the wealth gap. We do know, however, eliminating the wealth gap is good for the economy because it gives people like Kimmy greater opportunities in her career. It makes it easier for people like Greg or similar to grow his business, to grow his restaurant, and to compete with white families. And we do know, McKinsey has done a study. We do know eliminating the racial wealth gap, the black-white wealth gap, would boost economic growth. It's a no-brainer. We have so much talent going wasted because African Americans in their community often do not have the capital to realize the same dreams that whites have. And again, it's sort of wealth begets wealth. There is wealth that's already in the backing from families, for white families, that black families do not have, and thereby often forgo their dreams. And we're losing a lot of talent, we're losing a lot of innovation, we're losing a lot of inventions because we're not putting money in all communities equitably.
Well, we've got to leave it there. Thank you so much for helping us understand the enormity of the problem and helping us to really think about some of those solutions. I'm glad to hear you mention cash transfers. You're right. We've had a lot of conversations on this show about reparations. That's a politically charged word in a lot of ways. People get very strident in their positions when they hear the word. But the notion that there has to be some transfer of wealth if we're ever going to solve this problem.
Let me just be very clear. I'm in favor of reparations, but for me, morally and ethically, reparations are somewhat more or somewhat slightly different than just transfers. Yes, the reparations should be cash transfers, but I think reparations also have to come with a clear acknowledgement of the historical wrong that was done to African Americans.
Got it. We have to leave it there. Thank you again so much, Professor Weller, for joining us. Thank you, Kimmy. Hope that Biden goes all the way with the plans to wipe out college debt. I hope it's not just at 10,000. I hope it's 50,000, so you can get on to your path of success, building a business, buying a home, and doing those things that we know, reaching your full potential, and wishing you the best in terms of your career moving forward. Again, thank you, Professor Weller. Thank you, Kimmy, for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
All right, now my next guest, he does a lot of work trying to help young people understand the importance of building wealth through owning real estate. His name is Donahue Baker. He's a real estate investor, and he's on a mission to teach millennials how to build wealth. Good morning, Donahue.
Hey, how are you?
I'm great. I know you've been listening to this conversation. We've been talking a lot about how to shrink this wealth gap. We just heard the professor say it's an enormous problem. It's going to take a lot to shrink it, but I know you have what you believe to be one of the ways that Black young people can start addressing this wealth gap, and it's through real estate. So tell us how you got involved in real estate.
Well, one of the key things that I wanted to do was just create generational wealth in my family. So I have a 2-year-old son. He's 3 right now. His name is Legacy. But what I did for Legacy was created a trust, and through the trust, I purchased a 6-unit apartment building in Newark, New Jersey. And that building actually is going to do 2 things for him, right? First thing it's going to do is allow him to pay for his college education fully. The second thing it's going to do is use his God-given right. If he doesn't want to go to college, that is going to produce a solid income from him. So he'll be able to have options when he turns 18. So it's really about generational wealth, passing it on. That is the real key to do it. It's done one of 2 ways, or at least in our family, what we believe, it's really through real estate or through entrepreneurship. And that's really the key. One of the 2. You really need, like our generation needs to make the sacrifice to do that, either pass on real estate or pass on entrepreneurship.
Now, I know you own over 400 units in different cities throughout the country. How difficult was it to make that first purchase and then to grow into these 400 units?
I just made the decision to double my unit count every single year. So every year I wanted to make more money this year than I did last. So I started with the duplex. I lived in one side, rented out the other. Then I got a 4-plex and I doubled. Some years I didn't make it, but I made up in other ways. And what I realized was at some point, I had to get into apartment complexes, 100 units, bigger projects, things like that. And that's where I am right now, buying apartment complexes and just doubling the unit count, which creates passive income for me and my family.
So when you talk to Donahue young folks, when you talk to millennials, what's the response that you get back? Are they receptive? First of all, do they believe that this wealth gap is real? And then are they receptive to the ways that you think they can address it in terms of purchasing real estate?
Absolutely. There's a movement going on right now. It's a movement to improve financial literacy. You have other young people, such as there's a podcast called Earn Your Leisure that's really focused on improving financial literacy. There's an undercurrent. So in our community, we used to look up to the rappers, we used to look up to the athletes and the entertainers and things like that. Now they're looking up to the entrepreneur. They're looking up to the people that are starting businesses, owning real estate, getting involved in the stock market, what have you. There's an effort by young people to learn, and they understand that it's not the prototypical model to just get a job, work there for 30 years and retire. That day is over. They're figuring out they need to do other things.
Well, it's so interesting that you say that, because as we've seen, particularly in a city like Atlanta, so many of the rappers, the hip hop artists themselves are getting involved in purchasing real estate. And we saw that right here in Los Angeles with Nipsey Hussle. He bought a large part of land on Crenshaw where he had his store before he, was murdered. And we are seeing, even in that community, hip hop community, lots of rappers talking about, buying into the Black community. Do you think those rappers' consciousness about this is having an impact on millennials?
Absolutely. I mean, he's a model, still is a model, right? Because he looks like us. He's from our culture. He's relatable. People can see Nipsey. Nipsey is probably more influential than, Donald Trump, a president, so just to let you know, it's value when you see people in your community that you can touch, feel, know how they move, and you want to emulate success. That's really the goal.
Yeah, well, final word from you, Donahue. First of all, I love your positive energy. I love what you're saying about, Black folks now, millennials looking up to business owners, entrepreneurs. We love our athletes, we love our entertainers, but obviously there's a lot more pathways to success than just being in the entertainment or the sports field. So, kudos to you for not just, the steps that you've taken to pass down wealth to legacy, but also being willing to share what you've learned with other millennials and to help other folks, have a successful career and be able to build generational wealth. Final word, what would you say to someone out there that's sitting around, feeling like they don't know where to get started? They know they want to do something. What piece of advice would you give them to just get them going?
My piece of advice would be the easiest thing to do for me would be own real estate. If you believe in God, if you believe in the Bible, it says it. What's
that first step they should take, even if that's their goal? If their goal is I want to, buy my first house or my first unit, what's the first step to even doing that?
The first step is, number one, getting your credit right and improving your financial literacy, right? And doing your credit in such a way that your very first purchase should be a multifamily. It should be something that is income producing. It should be an asset that can pay for other assets. So the first thing that I would tell you to do is, instead of focusing on your dream home, focus on a multifamily. If you're a young person, do the multifamily first. Keep that, use the income from that to purchase your dream home later. The FHA has a program you can get in for as little as 3.5% down. Utilize that. I think everyone should have an FHA. So that would be my initial advice for young people looking to do just that, build generational wealth.
That is excellent, excellent advice. We got to leave it there. Thank you so much, Donahue. Really enjoyed learning about your success, and thank you for being a voice for those young people who are looking to jump into the real estate market, thinking about building wealth and thinking about building wealth even beyond their generation, creating intergenerational wealth, which is the name of the game today. So again, thank you, Donahue, for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
All right. I want to say thanks to all of my guests. What inspiring show. We went from debating, whether racism is a distraction, which it is not. It's a reality, to talking to a young man who's figured out a way to start to build generational wealth for his 3-year-old. So he's really thinking long term. And I think the lesson I take away from today is that this is a big, huge problem, no doubt, as Professor Weller told us, this Black-white wealth gap. And until our federal government, our state governments decide to make that cash transfer that Professor Weller talked about that will shrink that gap, there are things that we can do individually. You know, we can advocate, we can press, we can lobby for our government to make those big structural changes, but individually we can accept responsibility and we can get into the game. Either it's home ownership, it's multifamily units like Donahue talked about, it's owning a business like the Doolin family decided to do. The name of the game is you have it within your own power to change the trajectory of the wealth that you can create for yourself and for your family. So some words to live by before I get out. Let's cut the crap. Now, although I disagree with James Coleman's theory on how to close the wealth gap, I disagree with everything he said about race and the significance of race and structural racism in this country, I do agree it's time to cut the crap and debunk the ridiculous myths about why the black-white wealth gap today is the same as it was over 50 years ago. Let's cut the crap about Black fathers. James Coleman said that somehow Black fathers not being present in the homes of Black families is the cause of the black-white wealth gap. That's a bunch of crap. Somehow, this myth has been perpetuated that Black fathers are absent. That is a false narrative, and people that push that narrative are conflating marriage statistics with fatherlessness. When it comes to Black dads, the reality is most, in fact, are in the lives of their children. They either live with their children on a regular basis or they are in the lives of their children. A CDC study found that 2.5 million Black fathers were living with their children. And although half of Black children live in homes headed by women, they are not fatherless. Millions of kids live with their fathers half-time, or at least they have joint custody or partial custody of their kids. And for those Black fathers who do live with their children, guess what? A study says that these dads are more involved than white fathers in the day-to-day activities of their kids, from changing diapers to doing homework to walking kids back and forth to activities. Black fathers are involved in the everyday care of their kids. So let's debunk that myth. Let's not perpetuate it. Let's not keep repeating something, a soundbite that somebody may have picked up on a conservative news show. And let's cut the crap and end the myth that the black-white gap can be fixed by Blacks working harder or being hungrier. We are hungry. We work hard. But no amount of hard work is a repellent to structural racism. You heard Professor Weller say that. And it's not racism that folks like Jim want to talk about, but we have to, because it's racism and not the $200 Air Jordans, as a Washington Post columnist just laid out, that is preventing Blacks from catching up to whites. It's racism. And until we embrace it, we can't fix it. It's plain and simple. Now, what the country decides to do about this crap is up to us. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. Don't forget to wear your mask, and don't forget we are all in this together.